Hey guys, what's up? It's your girl Ginger Fox here. So this is a creepypasta I never heard of. If I have, it hasn't been for a long time. I don't remember a creepypasta named Jack though, from what I remember. Um, if I'm reading through it and I remember something or whatever, I will let you guys know and be like, oh yeah, I did hear this story or whatever before. But from what I'm seeing right now, just some of the things in the story from what I'm just seeing in front of me on the screen, probably not. But yeah, if you guys, I hope you guys are enjoying the creepypasta stories, and let's get into it. Dickon loved yard sales. Yet despite the size of the neighborhood sale he found on his way home from work, nothing had caught his eye. Disappointed but glad, he stopped anyway. Dickon turned away from the table he'd been going through and tripped over something at his feet. With a few ungrateful steps and a hop, he managed to keep himself upright, and looked to see what he had stumbled over, at the same time choosing to ignore the amused looks and snickers of his fellow treasure-seekers. Acting as though nothing had happened, he bent over and picked up the object that had been carelessly left behind him. It was a simple box, covered in a thin, tight layer of old dark leather, approximately 18 by 18 by 18, with a brass latch and pin, securing a securier lid in its top, as well as a brass trimming, and a crank on the right side. The design was clearly that of a jack-in-the-box, a common child's toy that when turning the crank produced a tinny song and a cheap scare as an overly made-up clown or jester popped out upon the song's completion. This though was not your average jack-in-the-box. Typically, the toy, now mass-produced in various warehouses across the world, was made out of pressed tin, was feather light, and about half the size. Also, Dickon could not recall ever seeing one that latched shut. But what's the purpose of that? It would ruin the scare if the clown couldn't pop out at the appropriate time. He tried to pull the brass pin out, but it was stuck and refused to budge even a hair. The result was the same with the crank as well, and despite his efforts, he couldn't get it to produce even a single musical note. Even though the toy didn't work, it intrigued Dickon. It was clearly old and probably needed some repairs, but he was willing to bet that even in its current state, it was worth some money. He turned the heavy box over and around looking for a price sticker, but could find none. Someone here must be selling it. Perhaps a kid had taken the sticker off in hopes of playing with it. He carried the jack-in-the-box to the only table with someone sitting at it. A rail-thin, middle-aged woman with long, red, extremely frazzled hair and tired blue eyes, sat with a clipboard in a metal box, exchanging various odds and ends for cash. He waited patiently behind three young boys who were debating the value of a box of sports cards. When they finally agreed on a price, they paid for their cards and moved on. The woman at the table looked at him with such expiration, I think that's how you pronounce it. He was sure she was going to demand to know what he wanted. He was surprised, though, when her expression softened. "Can I help you?" "I can't seem to find a price on this thing. Do you know how much it is?" He held the jack-in-the-box out for her to see, but not for enough for her to take it from him. "What is it?" She tilted her head, but saw nothing but an old box. "A broken jack-in-the-box." He turned the box enough to let her see the crank on the side. "You want to buy a broken toy? And a dirty one at that?" She sneered at the box in his hands, mistaking the aged leather for stains. Dickon shrugged, eager to make the purchase, but not wanting to let his excitement apparent. No need in letting on that, he thought. It might be worth more than a few dollars. "A project, really. I like to repair things in my spare time." Oh, a handyman, she smiled. Well, I'll tell you what, seeing as it's not marked, let's say $5. It'll go in the donation fund for the animal shelter, my favorite charity. Sounds fair, Declan agreed. Paying for his new treasure, he hurriedly headed for his car, eager to go home and see what he could do with the toy. An hour later, he had yet to locate any information on his particular Jack-in-the-Box. There was no manufacturer's stamp, no signature, or initialing of any kind to indicate who might have made the toy. He was surprised, though, when examining the box for at least the fourth time since bringing it home, to find a pentagram surrounded by a Latin on the bottom. The sinister star and Latin were burned into the otherwise soft leather covering. He hadn't noticed it earlier and wasn't sure how he could have missed it, but it was clear as day now. In his excitement over its age and potential profit, he must have overlooked it, he reasoned. I don't know. The pentagram certainly added to the mystery of the toy, and he had hoped that the Jack-in-the-Box uniqueness would make it easy to locate information about it. But it was quickly becoming apparent that maybe its uniqueness was the very thing holding up his search. Frustrated but not discouraged, he began yet another search when he heard the front door open. "Hi, honey," he called out to the only other person who had a key to his home. His girlfriend of 2 years, Melanie, I think it's her Melanie? "Hey, baby," she answered from the hallway as she stripped out of her jacket and shoes and dropped her purse before joining him on the couch and planting a kiss on his cheek. Dickens set his laptop aside, turned his head, and eagerly returned her kiss. "How was your day?" he asked. "Oh, long, drawn out, and uneventful. Glad it's over," she laughed, tossing her dark hair over her shoulder and cuddling up Declan. "What's that?" Declan reached over and picked up the toy. "Oh, I picked this up on the way home from work. Pretty sure it's a Jack-in-the-Box." "Pretty sure?" she asked critically. Looking at it, she couldn't think of anything else it could be. "Well, the crank won't turn, and I can't get the pin out of the latch." He shrugged and handed the box to Melanie. "But it's obviously old, so even if I gotta get some work done to it to get it in working order, I think I can make some money off of it. I've been searching online ever since I got home." Melanie turned the box over to examine it. Nothing, the pentagram in Latin before sitting the heavy box on her knees and rubbing her fingers together, surprised and a little disgusted by the soft texture of the surface. "Weird, huh? And covered in some type of leather that's gotta make it even rarer. Never seen one like that before." Declan grinned hopefully. Melanie nodded in agreement. "What does the Latin say?" "I'm not entirely sure. I put it through a translator, but it makes no sense. Something about music in a sleeper?" "What about these?" she asked, pointing to the metal caps on the box's corners. Declan leaned in closer and noted that every three-sided cap had engraved on each of its flat surfaces the number 6, so that each corner read 666. He stared for a moment in disbelief. How could he have missed that as well as the pentagram? Maybe it was time to go, to have his eyes examined, he thought ruefully. "I didn't even see those." "I'm not surprised. Not something you usually see on a toy," Melanie said distastefully. "Well, it kind of makes sense," Declan said, straightening up. "The original toy had been traced back to a 16th century German clockmaker who got the idea from a 13th century churchman who was said to have protected the city of Buckinghamshire by casting a devil into a boot. The clockmaker took this legend and created the devil in the box for the son of a local prince. When he turned the crank, a simple tune played, and at the end a comical painted devil popped out and surprised everyone. It was instantly popular. All the nobles wanted their own devil in the box. Sometime during the Renaissance, The devil was replaced with a jester, and the toy became known as a Jack-in-the-Box. Jack was an old nickname for the devil, so it still meant the same thing, but it seemed to have more appeal to people by that way. Declan explained. Creepy, Melanie sneered as she picked it up off her knees to hand it back to him. In her attempt to touch as little of it as possible, she misjudged its heaviness, and her hand slipped, nearly dropping it. Her reflexes were quick, though, and she caught it by the crank, causing the old brass handle to move forward. When it did, the first few beats of Pop Goes the Weasel rang out in clear, tinny notes. I thought it didn't work. Dickon excitedly grabbed the Jack-in-the-Box and set it on his own lap. It didn't. I couldn't get it to turn at all. Must have just been stuck. Guess you loosened it. He tried pulling the pin out once again, but still it refused to budge. He could see nothing that was preventing the pin from moving. No substance clogging up the latch, but still it would not move. Shrugging off the disappointment, he grabbed the handle and gave it a gentle push. Effortlessly, the crank moved forward, and the room filled with an eerily slow rendition of the children's rhythm. Children's rhyme, sorry. Declan tried to hurry along, turned the crank faster, but it refused to speed up. As the climax of the song approached, Declan felt his stomach tighten in anticipation, even though he knew the scare wouldn't come because of the stuck pin. Melanie was tense as well, memorized by the languid tune. When the pop rang out, the single note did not disappoint, the lid of the toy jumping in its frame. Melanie gasped and grabbed Dickens' arm, who started in surprise himself. The vibration of the box's movement still ringing through his hand. A second later, the couple looked at each other and laughed. Clearly, Jack is ready to come out and play. Dickens chuckled, pulling at the pin again. Melanie sighed loudly, shaking off the scare. Well, I am ready to eat, she informed him, taking the Jack-in-the-Box from his lap, still touching it as little as possible, and setting it on the coffee table next to his laptop. I am craving burgers from May's. In truth, she didn't really care where they went. She just wanted to be out of the house and away from the creepy toy. You got it, he agreed. Dinner at May's had turned out to be an excellent idea. For nearly 2 hours, they sat in the corner booth, sharing food, wine, and stealing kisses, while discussing their anniversary plans for the following weekend. After dinner, Melanie asked Dickon to drive her home. She was a lightweight when it came to alcohol, and she did not want to drive herself home. Unable to convince her to stay at his place, he dropped her off and promised to bring her car by before she had to go to work the following day. Entering his place alone, Declan felt a little lightheaded himself, but decided a single beer wouldn't put him over the top. Grabbing the drink, he flopped down on the couch and looked down at the Jack-in-the-Box, shocked to see the pin, stuck all day despite his best efforts, lay neatly next to the antique toy. No. What? Declan set the unopened beer on the couch next to him, picked up the brass pin, and stared at it in confusion. Unable to reasonably explain how it had come loose and landed so neatly next to the Jack-in-the-Box. Ready to show yourself? Declan almost whispered, as he flipped the latch back and began to turn the crank. Declan felt strangely apprehensive, and wondered for the briefest moment if perhaps it was better to leave Jack alone. Maybe I shouldn't have the beer, he said aloud to himself, shaking his head as he listened to the song's slow progression. When the pop came, nothing happened. The box sat motionless, not even a thud from within like earlier. Dickon sighed. Now what? He went to the kitchen to retrieve a butcher knife. If he had to, he would pry the lid open. Sitting once again in front of the toy, Dickon raised the knife as the crank began to turn slowly on his own volition. And the tinny song began to slowly play. I must have cranked it too much, he told himself as he walked in silence. As the pinnacle approached, Dickon was suddenly unsure whether he wanted to meet Jack or not. Before he could decide, the circular leather-covered lid flipped soundlessly open, and a blur of gray and white shadow of the box towards Deccan. More startled than he would ever admit, Deccan jumped and reflexively put up his hand, then cried out as a flash of white-hot pain shot through his palm. "Son of a bitch!" Deccan cradled his hand against his chest and stared in disgust at the thing bobbing slowly up and down on its noisy, antiquated spring. Antiquated springs, 10 inches high, minus the spring. It looked more like a corpse than anything else. Certainly not the typical jack. Oh God. The spine appeared to grow out of the spring itself and barely supported the thin, mill-formed skeleton draped in stringy, dry flesh. Ew, what? The mouth hung open, revealing a dozen sharp-looking teeth just below an empty hole where the nose should have been. Above the vacant hole, the eyes were sewn shut with thick strands of black thread. The top of his head came to a lopsided point, the skull almost entirely exposed except for a few stubborn patches of gray scalp clinging to short tufts of yellowed hair. Worst of all were the unnaturally long arms and exaggerating fingers that looked more like claws, tipped red with Deccan's blood and pulled close to his desiccated ribcage. His palms throbbed painfully, reminding him that he was injured. Looking down at the rivulets of blood running down his wrist, Deccan angrily backhanded the toy off the table, satisfied by the noisy way it crashed to the floor before heading to the bathroom to clean himself up. After deciding he didn't need stitches and bandaging up his hand, Deccan returned to the living room, picked up the jack-in-the-box, and stood it back on the table. Despite his momentary anger, he still thought the toy could be worth something, and hoped he hadn't damaged it with his childish gesture. Tomorrow he would look into taking it to an expert. For now, with Jack tucked back inside the box, a task that took far more effort than it should have, Deccan latched the toy, placed the pin, and went to bed. Just a few hours later, Deccan woke to a sound he knew but couldn't place. Wanting nothing more than to go back to sleep, but knowing that it was not going to happen until he knew what woke him, he forced himself out of bed to investigate. Nothing was out of place in the bathroom, so he headed down the hall towards the living room. It was empty and dark, except for the bright blue light from his laptop battery. It flashes low power warning off the amber-colored glass of the broken beer bottle, which lay in a pile between the couch and the coffee table. Looking at the mess, he realized what had woken him, the sound of glass breaking. But how had it happened? Even if the bottle was rolled off the couch, the distance was short and the floor was carpeted. It shouldn't have shattered. As he stood there trying to think of a reasonable explanation for the beer bottle breaking, he noticed the empty spot on the coffee table. Where was the jack-in-the-box? The brass latch pin, once again removed, lay next to his laptop, but the toy was nowhere to be seen. He closed his eyes and retraced his last few moments before going to bed. He was certain he left the toy here, so where had it gone? Was someone in the house? Had he been robbed? Cautiously, Deccan headed to the kitchen, the only room he'd yet to check. He barely stepped into the room when Potgo's weasel began to play from somewhere behind him. He spun around, expecting to see someone sneaking out of his house with the toy, but he was surprisingly alone. The song, though, continued to play, and to Deccan it seemed to be slowing down, almost as if it were calling to him, enticing him. He left the kitchen and followed the metallic tune through the living room, past the front door and into the hallway where the song continued, past and climax only to start over again. "Melanie?" Deccan called out tentatively. He knew it wasn't her, but hearing a voice, even just his own, made him feel less alone, less vulnerable, as he searched for the misplaced toy. "Melanie, is that you?" He walked slowly down the hallway, certain the music was coming from his bedroom, but pausing to check the bathroom anyway. He didn't want to admit it, not even just to himself, but he was delaying the discovery of the toy as long as possible. Melanie, I thought you didn't want to stay over tonight. When he reached his bedroom door, he could hear the music as clearly as if he were holding the toy. But even if it was overwound, the music shouldn't still be playing. Plus, he knew he hadn't shut the bedroom door when he left the room. So, it had to be Melanie. It just had to be. As soon as he twisted the doorknob, the music stopped. Mel? He pushed the door all the way open, hoping to see her standing there grinning triumphantly, pleased with herself for scaring him. Instead, he was greeted by an empty room, empty except for the Jack-in-the-Box sitting squarely in the middle of his bed. A chill ran through him, covering him head to toe, and thousands of goosebumps. The Jack-in-the-Box had not been on his bed. He would have noticed it. Melanie had to be behind it. Stepping into the room, he looked behind the door, in the closet, behind a large cupboard, cut out a Superman, and even, cardboard cut out a Superman, and even dropped to his knees to look under the bed. But despite his hopes, they were all empty. I should say. Even pushing himself up off the floor when the Jack-in-the-Box began its serenade yet again. It was so startling that his hand slipped and he landed back on his knees next to the bed. Son of a... The music picked up speed, making Dickens' heart skip a beat. Stop, he whispered pleadingly, reaching out to halt the crank. Before he reached it, though, it stopped, one note before the pop. Laughing in nervous relief, Dickens sighed and dropped his head on the edge of the bed. He had never been so relieved or felt so stupid. He stared at the box and couldn't believe that he had let paranoia get to him. It was only a toy, nothing but wood and metal, nothing vicious, nothing to be afraid of. Well, while he knelt there, berating himself, the single note announcing Jack's arrival chimed. The metallic ping was like a gunshot in the silence, and as he raised his head, the monstrous toy sprang from his hiding place, his long, spindly arms reaching out for him. This time Dickens screamed and threw himself backwards, landing on his backside, and Jack continued forward, the momentum carrying the toy off the bed where it landed between his legs. Holy crap, he cried angrily, not sure what he was more mad at, the toy or himself for fearing it. It was very old. There were kinks, loose parts, things that surely needed to be repaired. Hell, the spring alone was in desperate need of an oiling. He knew it was a desperate grasp at logic, but he didn't care. It was better than any other explanation. The Jack-in-the-Box lay on his side. Jack and Spring stretched out towards him, looking as though it was reaching for him. He shook his head, angry with himself for his apprehension, and forced himself forward to scoop Jack back into the box when it moved, the fingers stretching slowly as it reached for him. Dickon paused, not trusting his eyes, and in his hesitation, Jack confirmed his suspicions. His claws like hands swinging viciously at his fingers. Too shot to cry out, Dickon scooted back, his now bloody fingers making the floor sloppier as he tried to stand. After a fumbled attempt, though, he succeeded in steering disbelief, and Jack used his unnatural long and narrow arms to pull itself across the floor towards him. What the hell? No way, he breathed. His stomach clenched with fear as he sidestepped towards the hallway. Not wanting to turn his back on it, he glanced towards the doorway out of the corner of his eyes, and as he did, he heard the rusty creak of the spring, and for a brief moment he had the crazy idea that Jack was putting himself away. But when he looked back, Jack was airborne, launching itself towards him, using the force of the spring to push its body forward and dragging the heavy box along. It landed just a few inches short of Dickens' bare feet, and in his panic, he kicked at it, intending to send the awful thing flying across the room, hoping to break it. Before his foot even came in contact with the toy, Jack lashed out and grabbed onto his ankle, digging his sharp fingers deep into his skin. Dickon shrieked in pain and began to kick wildly, but instead of tossing the toy off, it seemed to energize it, and Jack's clawed fingers sought purchase higher up his calf, and it sank its ragged teeth into his shin. I think it's supposed to say skin. Get off! He continued to thrash his leg furiously until his foot made contact with the heavy wooden box, and he felt at least 2 toes crush instantly. Ouch! The pain was nauseating, and Dickon reached down to rip Jack off his leg. When his hands wrapped around the dry, thin body of the toy, he could feel the fierce, raw strength that flowed through it, despite its apparent delicacy. And Jack released his leg only to snake its way up his forearms. No, Dickon screamed in horror. Blood was running in 6 tawny rivers down his leg and pooling beneath his feet while he fought to get the horrible thing off of him. As he struggled desperately, he lost his balance, slipping in his own blood. Oh, Jesus. There was a brief moment of hope when he thought he could remain upright, but it was quickly lost as he fumbled into even more blood. He fell backwards, hitting the floor hard, first his shoulders, and then his head, bouncing off the hardwood with a crack. The house was suddenly silent, and the pain faded away as a heavy blackness came swimming up through the corners of his eyes. He saw Jack clawing his way up his chest, but felt nothing. Please, Dickon begged as darkness enveloped him completely. Dickon draped his arm over his eyes, having no desire whatsoever to open them. His head pounded furiously, but he had never been so glad to be awake. He was giddy with relief. That had been by far the worst and most vivid nightmare he had ever seen in his entire life. He would definitely not be drinking that much again any time in the near future. Sighing heavily at the thought of getting out of bed, but loving the idea of a hot shower, he put his arm down and sat up on one motion, but instead of the edge of his bed and the sun-filled room, all he saw was blackness, filled with a deafening and heart-sinkingly familiar creak. Dickon rubbed his eyes vigorously, trying to clear them. As he did, his finger caught something rough, something that made his heart ache with fear. He traced the roughness tentatively with his fingertips, knowing immediately what it was. Thick strands of thread bound his eyelids to the tops of his cheeks and came together in knots at the corner of his eyes. He shook his head violently, trying to wake himself. He had to be dreaming, he thought desperately, because the alternative was too terrible to concede, and he proceeded to fling himself around until he came up against a hard, flat surface. No. He couldn't hear his own voice, but he continued to mantrate anyway as he explored the walls that confined him on all sides. With every movement, he was taunted by an awful, metallic creak that filled him with a sickening dread that he didn't want to confirm, but could not ignore. After what seemed to Dickon like an eternity of hesitation, he placed his hands on his chest, startled by the sunken spots he felt. He continued down his waist, aware of areas of pain and a wetness he was sure was blood, but neither of which concerned him. He forced himself to explore further, past his belly button, and then nothing. No more flesh and bone, nothing but a cold, downward spiral ring of metal. No. In an instant, all reason abandoned him, and he began to thrash and scream, a raspy, torturous cry drowned out by the incessant creaking of his springs. Oh my God, that's horrible. So wait, did the Jack in the Box, switch bodies with him, or did he, get turned into, a Jack himself? I'm kind of wondering about that, if, this Jack in the Box had power to, switch bodies with this guy, or did he just get turned into, another Jack in the Box? I'm assuming they just got turned into just Jack in the Box, and nobody was switched bodies or anything. But that's pretty creepy, though. Can you imagine, being turned into a Jack in the Box? I hope you guys enjoyed that video. this story. As always, stay safe and take care. Bye bye.